Hey everyone, how's it going? I don't know how many people are listening. Maybe one person in their basement, maybe 20,000. I don't know. But thank you for joining me because this is the Tim Laskus Show. Today's featured guest is Tony Lee. He's a Canadian entrepreneur in the advertising and technology space with a background as a competitive athlete. Starting his first partnership at the age of 20, why, he was young. He's helped develop what we now refer to as a digital agency in the mid-1990s. From that point, he created his first IT company in 1999. That was a good year. He was building the first mobile connected intranet system for the entertainment industry. Tony Lee continues to work on entrepreneurial endeavors and with startups. He's always looking towards the future in this era of technology and global community. So sit back and enjoy.
The Tim Laskus Show, in search of entrepreneurial gold. Tim digs deep into the minds of his guests, entertaining, down to earth, and informative. Now, here's your host, Tim Laskus.
Welcome everyone to the Tim Laskus Show, and I am honored to have Tony Lee as my guest today. Tony, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me on here, Tim.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and it's wonderful to have you here. And we were talking earlier about your history in playing tennis, and I usually love the guests to tell the listeners a little bit about kind of what they do aside from business or what they've done as far as their passion in sports or anything that they enjoy aside from business. So tell the listeners a little bit about yourself other than business.
So other than business, I really grew up being a national competitive tennis player here in Canada. And I went through the system of training my body, training my mind to compete at a high level in tennis. And I found it really, beneficial in terms of shaping me, whether, on my decisions and shaping me as an entrepreneur to compete at a high level. And I love tennis. I spent 20 years pretty much playing and training, and there's nothing more exhilarating that I find being there on your own, being the key holder to your success.
Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned, kind of being an entrepreneurial kind of in there in tennis. And I'm sure a lot of those lessons learned as you were a competitive tennis player really apply to your life professionally as well.
Absolutely. The biggest thing my biggest takeaway from it really was the hard work. The harder you work at whatever you do, whether it's being a professional tennis player or whether it's being a professional guitarist, the harder you work, the more hours you put in, the more reward you're going to get out of it. It's a direct correlation, rather than, going out, and, getting a job at the grocery store bagging groceries, right? You're only going to make X amount of money even if you work harder. Mm-hmm. Right? But being an athlete, the harder you work, the more results you're going to get. And that's what I have taken into my entrepreneurial career.
Oh, yeah, that's very powerful. So you've got that reward, that correlates with that hard work. And I think that's what draws a lot of people to, wanting to be an entrepreneur. It's like, I put in, a lot of hours, but I don't really see a return. But just because you're an entrepreneur doesn't mean you're going to see an immediate return or any return as well. But if you have that discipline, just like you in tennis and you stay with it and continue to evolve and change and learn and grow, eventually you're going to start to see, the payoff. So with that said, let's kind of go into what you do professionally and what your expertise is. What are you currently working on, Tony?
So really, my expertise is in advertising, media, and publishing. I started in the advertising game back in the mid-90s and grew into a more into the publishing industry. Right now, what I'm working on is I'm sitting as an advisor to a small startup here in Toronto, and we're working on a new end-to-end distribution method for publishers.
So how rewarding has that been working with new entrepreneurs?
It's really, really rewarding because, other than me being able to give them my knowledge and my experience from my past businesses and my past entrepreneurial endeavors, the one thing that as I've grown older, that I've been able to take away from them is that fire. The fire when you are, 19, 20 years old, that nothing can stop you. And that's the energy, that I thrive on.
Right, right. And there seems to have been a shift, and I don't know when this took place, but I remember I'm in my mid 40s now, and I remember growing up kind of with the message that, if you're young, you really don't know anything. You haven't earned any respect, and you're still kind of new to the world and how it works, and certainly with business. And it was only the older gray-haired men who knew anything. And if you were young, you just kind of stayed in your place and you worked for someone. How did this kind of whole paradigm and this shift? Because now it's about all of these really young entrepreneurs who are just full of passion, and now you have the older guys that are looking up to these younger men and women who are coming through and going, wow, they've taken the reins. Do you have an idea of when the shift started to happen?
I think I kind of do because, I'm 40, going to be 41. And when I started my first partnership business, it was an advertising business. I was 20 years old, and I was a kid in the eyes of other business people, right? And I was criticized. I was looked upon as somebody that was too young to know anything. It was countless meetings of, CEOs telling me that I'm too young to know anything, right? And the shift really happened when, when Web 1.0 really took its stride, right? Before the bubble, right? And it was because of technology, because of the adoption of new technology by the younger generation, right? That they quickly learned that, by, having the younger generation understanding this technology faster than they can, right? They had to really look towards them for solutions.
Which is it's almost like the younger generation are born hardwired for technology. And I'll give you an example. I have a 3-year-old son, and when he was 1, he could open my wife's and my cell phone as well. I kept mine away from him though, but my wife used to give hers to him. He could figure out how to unlock the iPhone and go into it and go to the videos and pictures. He loved to look at that. And he would swipe and look through, and it was amazing to just sit and watch him to be able to do this. And now he's so proficient. He's 3, and he can do many different things. And he loves to go on to online. He can go on the YouTube, and he loves to look up Thomas the train videos on YouTube, and he goes around and he goes to different videos, and he knows how to. I mean, it's just mind blowing. It's almost like, this younger generation is hardwired for technology. They get it from birth. It's almost like, they get the bottle and the cell phone at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. But what you also have to look at, and I think what everybody really has to kind of consider, is that companies like Apple have really made the technology usable for anybody. Really, like its functionality, its interface, it's very easy to pick up. It's very intuitive, and that's what they were going for. But on the side of youth, youth, whether it's this current youth generation or whether it was the previous generation or our generation of youth, the one thing that we were that made us strive for more is the youth's ability to pick up on new things. It didn't matter what technology, whether it was technology or whether it was something else, right? It's just about being new, and that new, leveraging on that kind of like new trend, new topic, new technology, right? So it didn't even matter because, again, like growing up, how many kids learned how to program, in DOS, right? And it was
That's true.
hard, but they had the time to learn it because it was new and because it was available and it was accessible, right? So again, with every new generation of the youth, there's going to be a new thing, whether it's technology or something else, and they're just going to pick up on it.
Yeah, they really do. They embrace it hard and fast because technology changes so quick, and they are open to change. And it seems that as you get older, you're less open to you like more consistency and things that you're used to and consistent patterns and things you do and change is something that's not really embraced for not for everyone, not everyone, but for a lot of people who are a little bit older. But the youth, they just embrace it. And speaking of technology and newness and how we're just kind of today there's something that's hot and tomorrow there's something that's even better. In your experience as an entrepreneur, what have been some resources or maybe some information that you've stumbled across that has been really important for what you do and has maybe kind of changed either how you do business has been invaluable or even how you even think about business. Do you have something that you've stumbled across
Yeah,
during the years, all of your years as an
all of
entrepreneur?
that's a lot of years because I started my first partnership in 1996. So
Oh, wow. Well, maybe more recently
yeah,
than
I would
then.
say more recent. I think
Yeah.
one thing that really opened my eyes was a book. I believe it was written in 2013, and it's called "Who Owns the Future" by Jaron Lanier. And he's a technologist, and he wrote this book. And one thing that really struck me in the book was about how all the largest companies, they don't trade in hard currency as we know. They trade in people as currency,
Mm,
and not in a devious manner, but
right.
but people's data. That's the currency of this age,
Hmm.
right? So even if you look at social media, right? Any social media expert, anybody that has a large following, the way they're earning their living, the way they're earning ad revenue is because they have a large following, because they know the demo of their following, and that's the currency they're trading. They're exchanging their following, the data that they have on their followers and their viewers, to
Hmm.
companies that want to access that.
Mm-hmm. Got you. So the people on YouTube and other places and other social media sites that have large followings, thousands, tens of thousands, a million, or whatnot. Yeah, they've got tons of information, and I'm sure it's something that a lot of people would love to get their hands on. Um, so that's great.
Absolutely.
And so it was called Who Owns the Future,
Who owns the future?
and it was by Jeremy. What was the last?
Jaron, Jaron.
Jaron,
Yeah.
Jaron. Got you.
Lanier, Lanier.
Lanier. Jaron. Well, that's great stuff. Um, and you had talked about starting way back when in the 90s,
Yes.
when it probably wasn't so cool for a young guy to kind of go off and be an entrepreneur. So what made you different? How did you step out of line in a time when you were supposed to follow the pack?
I think the biggest thing for me was, and it goes back to, training as an athlete. not specifically, in tennis, but just my history with it, and really, training as that athlete. In the beginning, I really didn't have any support, right, from my family to be an athlete. They wanted me to be, an educated professional, a lawyer, an accountant, a politician.
Mm-hmm.
And my drive for athletics led me to find my own way to fund my athletics.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I didn't really set out to, I want to, didn't have this mindset of I want to own my own business,
Mm-hmm.
and do that in the future. And my mindset was I needed X amount of dollars to be able to train, to be able to be a professional athlete. So how am I going to do that? What's the best way I could do that with, reaping the most rewards out of it, and so that I can train. And that just stuck with me, right? That idea of the harder you work, whether it's you work for money or whether you're working to train as an athlete, the harder you work and the more you work and you put into it, the more results you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what really, led me down that path. Because again, it's, the work that I put in is a result, results in the success that I have. The lack of work that I put in results in the failures that that you could potentially have. So, works both ways, really. And I think, that's, the most control over your life that you can have.
Right, right, absolutely. And so you started after, I don't know how long it was after your tennis career when you were doing that competitively. You started your partnership at 20.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Really, I was in college at the time, and I studied advertising and graphic design. And I had a friend who's quite older than me approach me and talk to me about advertising, and he wanted to start a company, and it was really just basic. He just wanted to be able to provide solutions for other companies, like
Mm-hmm.
web solutions for other companies. And in 1996, that really wasn't on the radar for most companies. So we really, took that, and built an agency around that, an advertising and digital agency around that.
Wow, well that's great. And did you have kind of a lot of nervousness going into that? Did you think, oh no, what if this doesn't work out, or is this nuts, or?
I think, when, being 20, you don't have those nerves. You just know it's going to work
Mm-hmm.
because you're going to work hard at it. That's the big thing, is that if you've, like myself, grown up with that idea of if you put in the work, the rewards will come,
Mm-hmm.
then, then you just really have nothing to fear. Especially again, being 20, you, being
You're dreaming.
that young,
Yep.
your life is ahead of you. You're unstoppable. So,
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, most 20-year-olds at the time, they were everyone thought they were unstoppable, and a lot of it came down to more social interactions and going out and partying with your peers and those kind of things, right?
Right.
But for me, it was in line with business,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how I pushed through. And really, it just was natural for me just to work at something and know that there was a goal at the end,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Now, you had mentioned earlier that your family really wanted you to kind of go into a traditional career. So I guess that, they were probably pretty verbal about that. But, what kind of messages did you receive about money and finances growing up? About, how to manage money and just kind of everything about money and finances itself. Did you get a good education from your family about that, or did you have to kind of learn that on your own?
really I had to learn that on my own. I mean, in the end, understanding that, I had to raise my own funds for my own tennis career. I really had to, work hard at that balance of understanding how to earn enough money while at the same time, allowing myself enough actual time for training.
Mm-hmm.
Right there was that was the I guess the catch, right, was that I didn't have 8 hours a day to earn money.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to train 4 hours to 10 hours a day. So then how would I make money, right? Where would I you know be able to get that time back to be able to earn the money to pay for all these things? So you end up being creative,
Mm-hmm.
in that aspect, right? And then you end up picking up things, from I think the most beneficial thing that I had growing up in in tennis, is that the people around me, the adults around me, were successful people,
Mm-hmm.
and they knew, obviously knew about how their finances. They knew about how to earn,
Mm-hmm.
and how to be successful. So being a kid, you end up, especially spending most of your time at a country club, or a tennis club. You end up talking to a lot of
Mm-hmm.
adults, just to pass the time,
Sure. Right.
right?
Right.
So
Well, have you found yourself now that you're in your 40s that you've kind of passed down some knowledge about money and finances to the younger generation, or do you just kind of leave it up to them to figure it out as well?
well, I think for the most part, it's kind of, you know you're reiterating something that they already know, especially in this day and age. Some of these young entrepreneurs that I talk to, they understand the need, they understand the role of money and finances and growth, of their finances. So, the one thing that I try to instill in the younger generation is not to discount a formal education,
Mm-hmm.
because again, like that, you may not have that, you may not want to take that education in a professional level, or take the education that you got. Let's say you're studying to be an engineer and you didn't want to be an engineer in the end, but by continuing on and getting your certificate, your designation, your ENG, or even your PhD, you know I try to let them understand, or get them to understand, that those designations are valuable to your audience,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it really is a kind of, if you want to call it a hack.
Right. Well, it opens doors that they may have not had without it, for sure.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody that has that PhD designation decides they want to write a book about something else, given, obviously, as long as, the content is good, right, their PhD still carries weight
Mm-hmm.
in the world, and you can't discount that.
Right, right. And I think that's a great message because there seems to have been a shift to which is fine, but to the street smarts, kind of being more, I don't know, supported or celebrated more so than academic smarts. Now, it used to be that, everyone in academics, well, they were the, kind of the top dog. And then if you had street smarts, you're kind of on the bottom. And now it's kind of, there's a little bit of a shift of people are pounding their chest saying, I've got the real street smarts, and you guys in
Hmm.
academics are idiots, But there's a lot of merit to what you're saying. Is you can have that academic background and that training and that degree, which can open doors down the road, where you may have had that door closed just based on that. And that's just kind of how the world works. People like to size people up with what do you have? What are the initials behind your name? And sometimes that can be very helpful. But, do you, and as you were talking, and I kind of started out with, with money and whether you kind of gave an education about money. What is your thought about the amount of money that is kind of being dumped onto these new companies with these kids, 18, 19, 20 years old, who are seeking, financing for their, company. And it's just, there are people, with wheelbarrows of money, willing to give it away to these relatively unknown, untested, men and women who, are young. Do you see that as an issue or a problem, or do you think that that's just a wonderful thing?
I think, you know what I mean, it opens up, great opportunity for lots of people, whether you're young or old. I think, the danger was during Web 1.0 when people were throwing money away at everything, right? Just at any little website, they would spend millions of dollars just acquiring that domain, just acquiring the rights to the content on there, which was really not much in the end. And that's why we had that bubble, and that's why it popped. Right now, they're being very, the community, the venture capitalists, community equity firms, they're being, trying to be very smart with how they allocate their money now. And I think it's great because it helps spread the wealth a little bit more, right? To people that don't necessarily have, the support behind them to finance a business. So in all instances, I think it's a really, positive outcome that's happening now with the money that, because again, even though you're seeing investment, first round, seed funding for $5-10 million, that's not, the actual norm. There are, there's smaller scale investments that are happening, into the, $500,000, $1 million to get these companies up and running. And it's,
So that's more common
it's,
in that range.
yeah, absolutely. And it's something that's, really was, grown out of the failure of the past of just throwing money out. Right? They've learned, they've matured. The investors have matured to understand that, not everything's going to work.
Right, right.
Right?
Well, if you happen to be someone who's starting a company and you had some investors, you lost their money, are you pretty much kicked to the curb as a failure and you're never let back in to even have that opportunity to have more funding for the same idea or a different one? Is there a risk with, failing at first?
There is definitely a risk.
Mm-hmm.
I think for the most part, if you do lose, I think if you're smart, if an individual is smart, they will have a contingency fund set up for any kind of failure of their core business, right? It's something that you need to look at. It's something that's a necessity that you just have to be aware of. That if something goes wrong, then you can fall back, right, and start to pay back some of that money, and be in a little bit of a positive end to your investors, to your funders, right? Because if you lose the money, then it's it's going to be hard. It's a small community, right? You may be able to come back with a different idea, a different concept. You definitely could, but it's going to be that much harder of a climb to get funding again.
Right. And you may need someone to vouch for you and say, this guy's good. He's got it this time. He's
Absolutely.
learned.
You might just have to partner with somebody,
Yeah. A little bit better of a track record, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Right. So there's always
That
a way.
reminds me of the story of the creator of Soylent, right? The founder of Soylent, and
I
how.
don't,
Sorry.
I don't know that story.
Well, he's an engineer, and he had this startup, and he had all this funding coming in, and it wasn't working. And the what ended up happening is he took the last, I believe it was like $310,000 that he had left, and he put it into this product that he developed. That was a meal replacement product, right? And really, that the idea of the project came about because he didn't have the time to cook food and make food, so he needed to engineer food so that he can work more. And in the end, he brought that to fruition. So it was an idea birthed out of a problem that he had.
Wow, that's a great story. Very interesting. And speaking of problems, and especially as an entrepreneur and the stress that goes along with that, what's a recent stressor that you've had to deal with or overcome? And, what was it like for you mentally, and how did you cope?
Really, like after my second business, really, and this is not that recent, but after my second, this is the biggest kind of like story of burnout. After my second business, I experienced, great burnout. I had to leave. I had to sell off my shares of the company because I was working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week for 2 years, right? Managing a company, building a technology that, unfortunately, the world wasn't ready for. We weren't primed yet
Right.
for it. So, how did I get through the stress? I just had to really kind of take it one day at a time. I was lucky enough to be able to spend the year re-examining what I did, re-examining, all the effort that I put into a business to see it kind of, peter away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you find your own way when that happens. And it's, really, I was able to leverage the support of my friends to be able to get through it.
Well, it sounded like you had the right idea in handling that situation where you had decided you were going to figure out where did I go wrong, and how can I correct that the next time around. And that being your focus instead of having a pity party and go, wow, I really suck at business. I'm just an idiot or whatever that might be, because that gets you nowhere. And it's easy for some people to fall into that trap of negativity, and that becomes their focus versus, okay, what went wrong? How do I figure out this puppy and get it back on track, or recoup and regroup myself and start something else with new insight, fresh ideas, and a fresh perspective on how to do it better and more successful. So I think that was a great story that you shared, because so many people really aren't ready to deal with the stress of being an entrepreneur. It can be very, very difficult for them to overcome, and they just
Absolutely.
never see it coming. And one of the biggest things, I guess, is if you've been in worked for a company that you've developed for a year or many years, and then something happens and it closes down. I think what really becomes the biggest problem for people, more so than the money that's gone, but it's a lack of identity, because for so many years that was who you were, because like you said, working 16, 20 hours a day for years, your whole identity and sense of self is wrapped into that business. And when it's gone, it's almost like someone just took a part of you and just ripped it out. And then you're left with, for many people, nothing. And so I think that the whole, having your identity wrapped with it is kind of a key issue, that it is difficult for people to overcome.
Absolutely. And not to say, it wasn't difficult for me. In the beginning of that, stressful time, I did have to really reevaluate who I was, because I was my business. Like you said, my identity was wrapped in my business. And I really had to kind of analyze, really who I was, and take a step back and see what, not necessarily what went wrong with the business, but what went right, and why it potentially went wrong. And it, in my case specifically, what I did was I developed technology that would, that integrated mobile with web. And this is like 1999, 2000, right? And we were rolling it out, and people weren't ready for it because the cost, and we weren't a hardware company, we were a software company. I had to I came to grips that, even though we had a great idea and we wanted the world to kind of connect mobily, that the hardware just wasn't there, the support wasn't there. Right. So, for anybody, really that's looking at, a software kind of business, whether it's apps or anything like that, you're really constrained and bound to the technology that's available right now and that's been adopted right now. And I think, right now, there's not a lot of constraint at that level. So, which is good for, a lot of future thinkers.
Right. And timing is important. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And so during this incredible journey that you've had in business and doing your own thing, what's been kind of one of the most fulfilling moments of this entire trip that you've been on?
I think, it's funny because I was, I saw, it's one of those things where the most fulfilling part of my journey has also been, in the past, in my mind, has also been, my biggest loss, which is really kind of fascinating to me right now. And it goes back to, when I started, after, I ended my, my second company, and I started looking for other companies to invest in. This is much later, and this is around 2005. I started looking at companies to really invest in. And my brother, he put me onto a startup or a new company, new social media company that came out. And so I reached out to the company's founder, which at that time was really easy. And I asked him, I explained my background and I'm looking to invest, some money into your company. What is your, what would it take? And I received a response saying, it will take, $310,000 US for 1.5% of my company. And at that time, there was a lot of, kind of waves about social media, really, about its failures. And there was really a very uneasy feeling about it, in the world itself, right? So then really I saw that number, and I looked at it really hard, and I decided that, it was too much of a risk for me. I would put myself out too far to be able to, to invest that money in. So the communication, really ended there. I wished them all, the best, right, in the future, and thanked them for the opportunity. Well, lo and behold, the company that I reached out to was the Facebook.
Wow.
And that, and after Facebook popped, it, obviously popped, meaning popped in a good way. I did the calculations, and that I looked at it and I said, that my $310,000 investment would have netted me $175 million. That was 2.5 years later.
Wow. That's incredible.
Right. I recently did, and it's funny because, I look at it and I look back at the idea of me taking that risk. And this is why I believe that, this is, looking back at it, it's one of the most fulfilling moments, is because my gut told me to reach out to Mark Zuckerberg, to ask him about, investment.
Wow.
Right. And I had, this really gut feeling, but then the logic side of my mind, the fear of failure, and that, towards, that I would get, if I failed in front of my family, failed in front of their parents,
Sure.
stopped me, right? Held me back from making that leap. But I don't want to even call it a leap, because I didn't, after that point, I didn't even bother to do any research, to take a flight, to go meet with Mark Zuckerberg, right? To go talk to him about the company, talk to him about his plans, see where they were going. I didn't do the work. I didn't do my due diligence. I didn't do the research. That's why I believe that, now what I do really talk about to people is about turning risk into reward.
Right.
Because if you do enough work, if you do enough research, if you do your due diligence, that risk will no longer be a risk that you will take.
Wow.
You'll look at it as being an available reward for you. Or you could see it on the flip side, you can see it as it's a complete risk and I can't do it. So it's not going to make any sense. But if you don't do the work, you don't do the research, then really, you're really not playing.
Right. Absolutely.
And with that kind of like, mindset of, understanding that, that's the most fulfilling, and understanding that this is what I want to kind of pass down to these young entrepreneurs about risk and reward. I redid that calculation so that they understand the value of doing the work. And I redid the calculation just, I would say 6 months ago. Of that 1%, that $310,000, 1%, would have netted me over $5 billion today.
$5 billion with a B. That's incredible. I'm sure the listeners out there are going, oh my goodness. That is a wonderful story. And Tony Lee, you've just been incredible. You've given us some great information, and that story, there's some lessons learned in that, and you're passing on and helping these other entrepreneurs, and they're lucky to have you as a mentor and to guide them. And so this is kind of we're at the end of the show. We're going to wrap up, but before we do, Tony, I want you to let the listeners know, how can they reach out to you if they want to learn more about you and what you have to offer, and just contact you? Where can they find you?
Well, they can really just, find me. There's so many ways you can find me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm a proponent of LinkedIn, using LinkedIn as as a tool to grow your professional and entrepreneurial network. And you can find me at Tony Lee, TonyLei, the Mill, THEMIL. And that's my LinkedIn handle. You can find me on Facebook, Tony L. And you can also find my work, some of the things that I do beyond technology, on my website at TonyLei, TonyLei.ca.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, Tony. You've been a great guest, and you've been a wealth of information, and I've enjoyed it. And I hope to stay in touch and continue to follow you on your journey. And I wish you much success in 2017. And just, again, thanks again for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Tim.
Take care.
Want more entrepreneurial tips? Go to timlaskas.com.